The pain was a phantom limb, an invisible beast clawing at my insides, a constant, sickening throb that had devoured weeks of my life. Each day was an endurance test, every breath a shallow victory against a searing agony no one else seemed to see. But the physical torment, relentless as it was, paled beside the suffocating weight of my cousin Keanu's doubt. "You're just being dramatic, Sarita," he'd sigh, his voice flat, devoid of any sympathy. "It's always something with you. You just want attention." His words were a colder pain, a cruel dismissal that twisted the knife already lodged in my abdomen. They echoed in my skull, mingling with the relentless throb, making me question my own sanity, amplifying my terrible isolation. I was drowning in agony, desperate for air, and his disbelief was the stone tied to my feet. I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that I couldn't endure another moment of this silent, unheard suffering. Something had to give. The sterile chill of the emergency room hit me first, a stark contrast to the feverish heat building in my own body. The fluorescent lights hummed with a detached, clinical drone, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow on everything: the chipped linoleum floor, the worn plastic chairs, the pale faces of other patients, each nursing their own quiet misery. The air was thick with the faint, cloying scent of antiseptic, underscored by whiffs of stale coffee and desperation. It was a place designed for urgency, yet here, in the purgatory of the waiting room, time stretched, elastic and cruel, each second a fresh eternity. I clutched my abdomen, knuckles white against the thin fabric of my shirt. The beast inside me was no longer merely clawing, it was tearing, ripping at my insides with a frantic, relentless violence. The throbbing ache had intensified into a searing, constant burn, a white-hot poker twisting deep in my gut, occasionally punctuated by sharp, stabbing spasms that stole my breath. Each one left me gasping, dizzy, my vision blurring at the edges, a cold sweat beading on my forehead. I curled tighter in the uncomfortable chair, trying to make myself small, invisible, hoping that if I just held still enough, the pain might recede, even for a second. It never did. My entire being was a coiled spring of agony, vibrating with an intensity one hadn't thought possible. Keanu sat beside me, sprawled across two chairs, scrolling through his phone with an air of profound boredom. He hadn't even bothered to move one of the chairs for me, forcing me to perch on the edge of mine, my body angled awkwardly as if to protect the wounded core. He sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound, then glanced at me, his eyes flicking over my contorted face without truly seeing. "Are you still doing that, Sarita?" he asked, his voice low but sharp, laced with an exasperation that cut deeper than any physical pain. "Honestly, we've been here for an hour. People are looking." The thought of drawing attention, coupled with his familiar accusation, sent a fresh wave of humiliation washing over me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to rip open my shirt and show him the ravaged landscape of my insides, anything to prove that this wasn't an act. But all I could manage was a choked whimper. It's worse, Keanu," I gasped, my voice thin, reedy. My throat felt raw, my mouth dry. "It feels like something's tearing. I can't stand it." I tried to elaborate, to find the words to convey the sheer terror of what was happening inside me, but the pain tightened its grip, stealing my focus, reducing my vocabulary to whimpers and gasps. He just rolled his eyes, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "It's always worse. Every time. Just breathe. You're fine. It's probably just gas or something you ate." He then returned his attention to his phone, the glowing screen a barrier between us, more important than my agony. His words, delivered with such casual cruelty, twisted the knife already embedded in my side. Gas. This was no gas. This was a war zone, a relentless siege on every cell in my body. My mind, usually so sharp, felt like a broken kaleidoscope, fractured by the relentless assault of pain. Every sound in the waiting room, a baby's cry, the muffled chatter of a family, the distant wail of a siren, grated on my nerves, amplified my suffering. I longed for the simple mercy of unconsciousness, for a moment's reprieve from this relentless torment and the soul-crushing weight of Keanu's disbelief. It wasn't just physical, it was an existential agony, a feeling of being utterly alone in a sea of indifferent humanity. I tried again, desperate for even a flicker of empathy. "Please, Keanu," I whispered, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, blurring the already blurry world. I don't think I can wait much longer. Can you ask them? Just tell them. I really don't feel well. I think something is really wrong." He looked up then, a frown etched on his face. "Ask them what?" "That my cousin likes to make a scene. We're on the list. Everyone waits. You're not special, Sarita. You're just embarrassing me, and honestly, this is getting ridiculous. You're turning into a professional patient." He gestured vaguely at the other people in the waiting room, some of whom indeed cast curious glances our way, though most seemed lost in their own worlds of pain or worry. The shame burned anew, searing through my already ravaged body. Professional patient. The words echoed in the hollow space where my self-worth used to reside. Was he right? Was I really just making this up? Was my body betraying me, manifesting phantom pains for attention I didn't even consciously seek? A terrifying self-doubt began to creep in, insidious and cold, mingling with the fiery agony in my belly. But then a fresh, brutal spasm clenched, doubling me over, a strangled cry escaping my lips, hot tears finally spilling down my cheeks. No. This was real. This was a desperate, undeniable reality. And no amount of Keanu's dismissals could make it vanish. I was dying, slowly, painfully, in this cold, indifferent room, and no one cared enough to truly see. The triage desk, a beacon of potential help, seemed miles away, an insurmountable distance in my pain-addled state. I had to make it. I just had to. The world was a kaleidoscope of agony and fading light. Each breath was a shallow, painful gasp, each movement a fresh wave of nausea that threatened to drag me under. But the triage desk, impossibly far just moments ago, was now finally within reach. Keanu, with a sigh of exaggerated impatience, half-dragged, half-supported me forward. My legs felt like lead, my entire core a burning, twisted knot. I leaned heavily against him, shame and a desperate need for help warring inside me. "Name?" the nurse asked, her voice flat, her eyes scanning a computer screen rather than my rapidly deteriorating form. She was young, efficient, and seemed utterly devoid of empathy, a stark contrast to the kind, elderly volunteer who had offered me water earlier. "Sarita Al-Ghazi," I managed, my voice a reedy whisper, barely audible over the dull roar in my ears. The room swayed. I fought to stay upright, gripping Keanu's arm like a lifeline, though the thought of him being a lifeline felt like a cruel joke. "Reason for visit?" she continued, tapping keys. My turn. My chance. To finally be heard. "Severe, abdominal pain," I rasped, trying to inject urgency, detail. "Weeks now, getting worse, sharp, stabbing, spreading. I think I trailed off, a fresh wave of nausea rising, my vision tunneling. The pain was a living entity, clawing its way up my throat, demanding to be seen, to be acknowledged. Before I could finish, before I could articulate the terror that I was dying, Keanu leaned in, his voice calm, confident, utterly dismissive. "She's exaggerating. She does this for attention." The word struck me like a physical blow, sharper and more devastating than any spasm in my gut. My head snapped towards him, the world tilting violently. My cousin, the only one who had grudgingly brought me here, the one I had depended on, had just thrown me under the bus. He had painted me as a fraud, a histrionic liar, to the very person whose job it was to assess my desperate need. The nurse looked up then, her gaze flicking between my crumpled, pain-racked face and Keanu's placid, annoyingly reasonable one. A faint, knowing smirk touched her lips as she made a note on her screen. "Right," she said, her tone confirming her judgment. She had believed him. Just like everyone else. Humiliation. Betrayal. Despair. They warred for dominance inside me, intertwining with the relentless physical agony until I couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. My eyes burned, but no tears came, they felt too heavy, too used up. Keanu's words, "She does this for attention," echoed, deafening me to the sterile sounds of the ER. Was this my fate? To suffer invisibly, to be dismissed, to die because no one would believe me? A cold knot of fear tightened in my chest. This wasn't just about my pain now, it was about my very existence being denied. My voice, feeble as it was, had been silenced, not by disinterest, but by active malice from the one person who should have stood by me. He didn't just doubt me, he actively sabotaged my plea for help. My knees buckled. I swayed dangerously, Keanu's arms still around me, but his support felt like a cage, not a comfort. The burning in my abdomen intensified, spreading outwards like wildfire, consuming me. I felt a cold sweat break out, drenching my clothes. My breath hitched, a desperate struggle for air that wouldn't come. The colors of the triage desk, the blur of people, the indifferent nurse's face, all began to spin, merging into a dark, swirling vortex. Keanu's voice, a detached murmur, seemed to come from a great distance. "Sarita. You okay?" His tone held a hint of annoyance, not concern. No. I was not okay. I was breaking. My heart shattered into a million pieces, not just from the physical torment, but from the profound, crushing realization that I was utterly, irrevocably alone in this. The last vestiges of hope, the fragile belief that someone might finally see past the dismissals, flickered and died. The ground rushed up to meet me, and then there was only darkness. Sarita's collapse isn't just a physical fall, it's the heart-wrenching moment when someone feels utterly alone, their pain dismissed, their truth invalidated. Have you ever felt that profound loneliness, that crushing weight of being unheard? If Sarita's journey resonates, we invite you to join our global community. Please consider subscribing. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to light, stories that validate the overlooked, celebrate resilience, and remind us that no one should ever feel alone. Come, find your voice with us in this safe space, where every experience is honored. Darkness. Then, a cacophony of urgent sounds, distant shouts, the rhythmic thud of my own heart against the floor, the metallic clatter of something falling. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache that layered itself over the inferno raging in my abdomen. I was vaguely aware of hands on me, lifting, rolling. My body was an unresponsive weight, a vessel of agony, but somewhere, deep inside, a flicker of consciousness stubbornly clung on. Pressure dropping fast. "Get a gurney." Stat. A voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the din. It was different. Not the indifferent drone of the triage nurse, nor Keanu's exasperated whisper. This voice was laced with an urgency that resonated with the terror still bubbling beneath my haze. I felt myself being transferred, the jolt sending a fresh wave of nausea through me. My eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. Above me, fluorescent lights blurred into an agonizing glare. Shapes swam into view, white coats, masked faces, frantic movements. Then, a face leaned in close, framed by neat braids pulled back from a warm, intelligent face. Her eyes, dark and piercing, met mine directly. They weren't cold or dismissive. They held a fierce, unwavering focus. This was Dr. Chidimma Okoro, though I wouldn't know her name until much later. In that moment, she was simply the one who saw. "Sarita," she said, her voice a calm anchor in the storm, clear and unwavering even amidst the escalating urgency around us. Her hands, firm but gentle, were palpating my abdomen. A gasp escaped me, a choked sob of pain. "I know it hurts, sweetheart. Tell me where. Point with your finger, even if it's just a twitch." Her request was simple, yet it pierced through the fog of pain and despair. She wasn't asking if it hurt, or why I was making such a fuss. She was asking where. She believed me. The sheer, profound relief of that realization was like a sudden, warm current washing through my frozen limbs. It wasn't just a doctor doing her job, it was a human seeing another human's pain. Beside me, I heard Keanu's voice, a flustered murmur. "Doctor, I told the nurse, she can be a bit dramatic, you know." Dr. Okoro didn't even glance at him. Her gaze remained locked on mine, unwavering, communicating a silent promise that I was her only priority. "I hear you, Sarita," she said, ignoring Keanu completely, her fingers pressing lightly, then more firmly, lower right. My body convulsed, a silent scream building in my throat. "Yes. I see it. You're contracting, right here." Tears, hot and sudden, streamed down my temples, pooling in my ears. They weren't just tears of pain anymore. They were tears of validation. Of vindication. This woman, this stranger, had just cut through weeks of dismissals, through Keanu's cruel words, with a single, empathetic glance and a focused touch. My suffering was not invisible to her. My body was speaking, and she was listening. "We need to move quickly," Dr. Okoro declared, her voice now carrying more authority. "This isn't dramatics. Her vitals are unstable. She's rigid in the lower right quadrant, guarding intensely, and her fever is spiking. I suspect acute appendicitis, possibly ruptured. Get her prepped for immediate CT scan, then straight to OR. Call Dr. Davies for consult. Get 2 large bore IVs in, start fluids, broad-spectrum antibiotics." Her words, though clinical, were music to my ears. Each instruction was a step away from dismissal, a step towards truth, a step towards life. She wasn't just seeing me, she was acting for me. She was standing up for me, not with words of argument, but with the undeniable power of medical authority and immediate, decisive action. I felt a prick in my arm as N4 was inserted, then another. The world began to sharpen, albeit through a haze of pain. I could now clearly see Keanu standing a few feet away, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. The casual dismissiveness was gone, replaced by genuine shock and a dawning horror. His narrative, his easy accusations, had been utterly obliterated by Dr. Okoro's calm, clinical pronouncements. He was no longer controlling my story. A frail sense of courage bloomed in my chest. I had been so utterly alone, so convinced that I was losing my mind, that my pain was somehow invalid. But Dr. Okoro's presence, her focused determination, her unwavering belief in my silent cries, had reignited a spark. I wasn't just a collapsed body, I was Sarita, a person whose pain was real and deserved to be seen. "Hang in there, Sarita," Dr. Okoro said, her face still close to mine, a small, reassuring squeeze to my arm. "We're going to figure this out. You're safe now." Safe. The word resonated deep within me. It wasn't just physical safety she promised, but emotional safety. The safety of being believed. In that chaotic, painful moment, surrounded by strangers, I felt a profound, unexpected surge of hope. Hope that this nightmare was ending. Hope that my voice, though silenced by pain, was finally being heard through the compassion and competence of Dr. Okoro. The fight wasn't over, but now, I wasn't fighting it alone. I had an ally. And that made all the difference. The world tilted. Strong, decisive hands gently yet firmly lifted me from the chaos of the triage floor onto a gurney. My body protested with a fresh wave of agony, a guttural groan escaping my lips, but the pain was no longer a solitary burden. It was being acknowledged, met with swift, purposeful action. Dr. Okoro's face, etched with focus, remained a steadfast anchor in my blurred vision. She moved with an efficiency that conveyed both urgency and competence, her presence a shield against the lingering echoes of Keanu's dismissal. BP dropping, I heard someone say, their voice sharp. Pulse rapid. A nurse, a kind face I vaguely recognized from the initial rush, was already prepping my arm. The prick of the foreneedle was a momentary, sharp sting, but it was quickly overshadowed by the comforting chill of fluids beginning to flow into my starved veins. This pain was different. It was the pain of rescue, of intervention. It was hope, in liquid form. The journey through the ER felt like a dream sequence. Fluorescent light streaked overhead, indistinguishable faces rushed past, their voices a muffled symphony of medical jargon. Every jostle of the gurney sent searing pain through my abdomen, making me clench my teeth and dig my nails into the thin sheet beneath me. But amidst the torment, a fragile tendril of vindication began to unfurl in my chest. They weren't questioning me, they were treating me. They were finding answers. CT scan, stat, Dr. Okoro's voice cut through the din, clear and commanding. Looking for acute appendicitis, likely ruptured. Possible peritonitis. Each word was a tiny hammer striking against the fortress of my doubt, shattering it piece by piece. Ruptured. Peritonitis. These were serious words, terrifying words, but they were also words that acknowledged the immensity of my suffering. My pain wasn't exaggerated, it was simply accurate. We were wheeled into a colder, quieter section of the hospital. The room was sterile, dominated by a large, intimidating machine, a white donut with a narrow bed sliding through its center. The air hummed with an unseen energy. My heart pounded, not just from the sepsis, but from a potent cocktail of fear and desperate anticipation. This was it. This machine would look inside me. It would see the truth. As they helped me slide onto the hard, narrow bed of the CT scanner, I caught a glimpse of Keanu. He stood awkwardly by the doorway, his usual smirk entirely absent. His arms were no longer crossed in dismissive judgment, but hung limply by his sides. His face, usually so composed in its skepticism, was now a pale mask of uncertainty, perhaps even fear. His eyes, meeting mine for a fleeting second, held a flicker of something I hadn't seen in weeks, concern. He saw the urgency in their movements, the seriousness in Dr. Okoro's quiet commands. He was starting to understand, I thought, with a grim satisfaction that momentarily eclipsed the pain. Just lie still, Sarita, a technician's voice was gentle but firm. You'll hear some noises, but it won't hurt. The bed began to glide, slowly, inexorably, into the heart of the machine. The space felt claustrophobic, but I welcomed the enclosure. It was a chamber of truth, a place where my pain could finally be seen for what it was. The machine whirred to life, a low, rhythmic thrumming vibrating through my entire body. Then came the louder clicks, the dull thumps, the high-pitched whistles that echoed in the confined space. Each sound felt like a microscopic lens focusing, searching, gathering evidence. I closed my eyes, picturing the invisible rays penetrating my flesh, revealing the hidden enemy within. My abdomen screamed, a hot, throbbing protest that intensified with every breath. But my mind was clearer now, sharp with a singular, desperate plea, see it. Please, just see it. What if they saw nothing? What if, despite the urgency, the fluids, the doctor's belief, the scan came back clear? The thought was a cold, paralyzing dread. Would I return to the purgatory of being misunderstood, of having my pain dismissed as hysteria? The emotional stakes felt as high as the medical ones. My very sanity, my right to my own reality, hinged on the images this machine was creating. The scan felt like an eternity. Each whirring cycle was a breath held, a prayer whispered without words. I could feel the medical team's presence just beyond the machine, their hushed tones a constant reminder that something critical was unfolding. When the bed finally slid back out, returning me to the open room, I was utterly spent. Exhaustion seeped into every bone, but beneath it, a strange sense of calm had settled. The feeling of being examined, truly examined, had been oddly empowering. I was too weak to lift my head, but I could hear the immediate, quiet consultations. The technician spoke in low tones to Dr. Okoro. I didn't catch the exact words, but the gravity in their voices, the quick, concerned glance Dr. Okoro shot towards my body, confirmed my growing suspicion. The evidence was there. It was undeniable. I felt it, even before a single word was spoken. My suffering was not a figment of my imagination. It was real. And now, they saw it too. The world bled back into existence slowly, through a fog of chemical haze. My first sensation was an ache, deep and unfamiliar, but blessedly, it wasn't the searing, twisting torment that had defined my previous weeks. This was a dull, rhythmic throb, a signal of intervention, not impending doom. My eyes fluttered open to the soft glow of a hospital room, a silent witness to my survival. Keanu was there. He sat hunched in a chair, his usual confident posture utterly gone, replaced by a defeated slump. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed and distant, not looking at me, but at some point far beyond the sterile walls. The sight of him, so utterly stripped of his usual bravado, was startling. He looked broken. The door clicked open, and Dr. Okoro stepped in, her presence instantly calming and commanding. She carried a clipboard, but her eyes, when they met mine, held a deep, empathetic warmth. "Sarita," she said softly, her voice a balm. "Welcome back. The surgery went well." Relief, so profound it almost made me weep, washed over me. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice a rasp. Dr. Okoro offered a small, reassuring smile, then turned her gaze to Keanu. "Keanu," she addressed him, her tone firm but not accusatory. "We need to talk about what we found." He flinched, as if physically struck, finally lifting his head to meet her gaze, then mine. His eyes, full of a raw, exposed guilt, were almost unbearable to meet. Dr. Okoro continued, her words precise, chillingly clear. Sarita presented with a ruptured appendix. It wasn't just inflamed, it had burst, spilling its contents into her abdominal cavity. This led to a severe case of peritonitis, a dangerous infection of the abdominal lining. She was on the verge of septic shock when she collapsed. Each word was a hammer blow, not to me, but to the suffocating doubt that had shadowed my pain for so long. Ruptured. Peritonitis. Septic shock. The medical jargon wasn't just information, it was vindication, undeniable and irrefutable. My agony hadn't been an exaggeration. It had been a desperate cry for help from a body waging war against itself. It was extremely critical, Dr. Okoro stressed, looking directly at Keanu, then back at me. Had we waited much longer, the outcome could have been very different. Her body was fighting for its life. Keanu made a strangled sound, a mix of a gasp and a sob, burying his face in his hands. The air in the room thickened with unspoken remorse. He didn't need to say anything, the truth, stark and brutal, had finally pierced through his denial. My own emotions were a tumultuous storm. There was overwhelming relief, a visceral understanding that I had been saved from the brink. But beneath it, a slow-burning anger began to simmer. Anger at the weeks of suffering, at the constant invalidation, at the crushing dismissals that could have cost me everything. The words, "She's exaggerating. She does this for attention," echoed in my mind, now sounding grotesque, monstrous, in light of Dr. Okoro's pronouncement. Dr. Okoro turned fully to me, her voice softening, though the conviction in it remained. Sarita, you did well to hold on. You listened to your body. Despite everything, you pushed through. Your pain was absolutely real, and it was a critical indicator of a severe, life-threatening condition. That was it. That was the validation I had craved, the truth that finally set me free. Not just from the physical torment, but from the insidious emotional prison built by Keanu's skepticism. My eyes welled up, not from pain, but from the sheer, liberating force of being believed. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying, the burden of proving my own reality, lifted. It was an astonishing, almost unbearable lightness. I wasn't a drama queen. I wasn't attention-seeking. I was a person in legitimate, critical pain, and now, finally, the medical truth had not only caught up but had shouted down every single doubt. My suffering was undeniably real, my experience valid, my voice, at long last, heard. The doctor's words were more potent than any pain medication, flooding my weary soul with a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. The doctor's words were more potent than any pain medication, flooding my weary soul with a sense of peace that had been absent for far too long. The world, which had felt like a suffocating, soundproof box for so long, suddenly had a window flung open. Air rushed in, cool and clean, filling my lungs with a clarity I hadn't realized I was missing. My physical body was still battered, incisions of fresh testament to the trauma, but inside, where the true wounds had festered, a profound and delicate healing had begun. Keanu was the first one to come forward. He stood at the foot of my bed, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the hospital linoleum as if searching for answers there. The usual swagger was gone, replaced by a devastating vulnerability. When he finally looked up, his gaze met mine, raw and full of a shame so profound it was almost palpable. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Sarita," he began, the single word heavier than anything he'd ever thrown at me. I am so sorry. So unbelievably sorry. I was wrong. So wrong. You could have died because of me." His voice cracked on the last word, and he visibly struggled to regain composure. Tears welled in his eyes, tracking paths down his normally impassive face. It wasn't just a medical apology. It was a complete dismantling of his entire worldview, his assumptions about me, his role in my suffering. For years, I had craved an acknowledgement, a simple, "I believe you." Now, I was receiving a full-blown confession, steeped in agonizing guilt. I didn't immediately offer absolution. My healing was too new, too fragile for that. But seeing the genuine remorse etched into every line of his face, feeling the seismic shift in his presence, a tiny crack in my emotional armor began to form. It wasn't about winning, it was about being seen, finally. My mother, normally so deferential to Keanu's confident pronouncements, arrived later, her eyes still red-rimmed from crying. She didn't speak much, just held my hand, tracing patterns on my knuckles. But in her touch, in the way she looked at me, no longer with a hint of suspicion, but with pure, unadulterated love and relief, I felt her own quiet apology. She had always wanted to believe me, but Keanu's forceful dismissal had swayed her. Now, the medical truth had given her permission to trust her own daughter, and her quiet, tearful validation spoke volumes. Other relatives trickled in over the next few days. Some offered clumsy apologies, some just averted their eyes, embarrassed by their past skepticism. But every single one treated me differently. The mocking undertone in their voices was gone. The dismissive glances had vanished. In their place was a newfound respect, a solemn understanding of what I had endured, not just physically, but emotionally. I was no longer poor Sarita, who's always got something wrong with her, but Sarita, the brave one who nearly died. The labels had changed, and with them, the entire dynamic of my family interactions. And then there was Dr. Chidimma Okoro. She visited me a few times during my recovery, always with that calm, reassuring presence. I wanted to tell her everything, how she had saved me in more ways than one. But words felt inadequate. "Dr. Okoro," I managed, my voice still weak. "Thank you. For seeing me. For believing me." She just smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Sarita, it's my job to see patients, not just symptoms. Your body was telling a powerful story, and it was my privilege to listen." Later, I overheard one of the nurses comment to another, "Dr. Okoro's instincts are incredible." Another minute and the sentence trailed off, but the sentiment hung heavy in the air. Dr. Okoro wasn't just a skilled surgeon, she was a beacon of empathy, and her colleagues recognized it. She was celebrated, quietly, professionally, for her sharp judgment and compassionate care, which was as validating for me as anything else. Processing all this was a journey in itself. The initial relief had evolved into a fragile, burgeoning strength. I had spent so long feeling like an outsider, a lone voice crying into a dismissive wind. Now, the wind had died down. My voice, once so easily silenced, had been amplified by a medical diagnosis, by the undeniable truth. I wasn't just Sarita who had a ruptured appendix, I was Sarita who had been gaslit, dismissed, and yet had survived. I was Sarita who had fought for her own reality, and ultimately, had it confirmed by the highest authority. This wasn't just about my appendix anymore. It was about my worth, my intuition, my right to define my own experience. The isolation that had been my constant companion for weeks, months even, was receding. In its place was a connection, a bridge built on understanding and genuine belief. I wasn't just being heard, I was being seen. Not as a bundle of exaggerated symptoms, but as a person, whole and valid, with a story that deserved to be told and, more importantly, believed. The weeks that followed my surgery were a blur of pain management, slow, deliberate movements, and an unexpected clarity. My physical recovery was a testament to Dr. Okoro's skill, but the emotional healing felt like an entirely different, more profound operation. I had survived, not just the peritonitis, but the insidious poison of being disbelieved. Keanu, for his part, was an unrecognizable presence. Gone was the impatient, dismissive cousin. In his place was a quiet, watchful man who brought me fresh juice, fluffed my pillows, and sat by my bedside reading aloud from a book I hadn't known he even owned. He didn't hover, he simply was there, a constant, gentle anchor. His initial, halting apology had blossomed into a consistent, attentive care that spoke volumes more than any words could. I didn't forget the pain he'd inflicted, nor the casual cruelty of his dismissals, but I saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped with a weight that wasn't mine to carry. It wasn't about forgiveness in the sense of erasing the past, but about acknowledging his change and allowing it to reshape our future. He never again trivialized my experiences, or anyone else's in my hearing. Our relationship, once a source of constant low-level dread, was slowly, carefully mended, built on a new foundation of respect and, for the first time, genuine trust. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and for me, that was a victory. The rest of the family's reactions were more varied. There were the hushed tones of concern, the awkward apologies from aunts who had perhaps echoed Keanu's sentiments in the past, and a newfound, almost deferential respect in their gazes. Some of it felt performative, a scrambling to align themselves with the undeniable medical truth, but I found I no longer cared to dissect their motives. My worth wasn't contingent on their belief anymore. I simply was. I didn't need their validation, I had my own. This freedom, the shedding of the burden of constantly trying to prove myself, was like shedding a heavy cloak I hadn't realized I'd been wearing for years. The biggest transformation, though, was internal. For so long, my pain had been a silent, solitary burden, compounded by the constant battle against gaslighting. I had questioned my own sanity, wondering if I truly was making it up, if my body was betraying me by exaggerating symptoms. The diagnosis was more than a medical truth, it was a cosmic affirmation. It told me, unequivocally, that I wasn't crazy. My body wasn't lying. My intuition had been screaming, and it had been right. This realization was a seismic shift in my sense of self. I began to trust myself in a way I never had before. My inner voice, once a timid whisper, grew stronger, clearer. I also learned a profound sense of self-compassion. The constant invalidation hadn't just been emotionally draining, it had been a form of trauma. I grieved for the girl who had suffered alone, doubted and dismissed. I mourned the weeks of unnecessary agony, the feeling of being unheard. But with this grief came a fierce tenderness towards myself. I started treating my body and my mind with an unprecedented level of care. If something felt off, I no longer dismissed it. If I needed rest, I took it. My needs were no longer negotiable, no longer subject to external judgment. They were my priority. This newfound strength wasn't aggressive or confrontational, it was quiet, deep, and unshakable. It was the power of knowing who I was and what I deserved. I found my voice, not just to recount my story, but to advocate for myself in all aspects of my life. I set boundaries with a quiet confidence that surprised even me. My relationships became healthier because I refused to tolerate anything less than genuine respect. Looking ahead, my future felt boundless, not in a naive, everything is perfect way, but with a grounded, resilient hope. I carried the scars of my ordeal, both physical and emotional, but they were no longer marks of shame. They were emblems of survival, of a truth-hard one. I saw a future where I continued to listen to myself, where I empowered others to do the same, and where I used my experience to foster understanding. The freedom of being heard had not just healed me, it had fundamentally reshaped me. I was Sarita Al-Ghazi, and my story, finally believed, was just beginning. It was a story of resilience, self-worth, and the undeniable power of one's own truth. My journey reminds us all that our pain is valid, our voices matter, and we unequivocally deserve to be believed. Has there been a time when your truth was dismissed, only to be powerfully vindicated? We'd be honored to hear your story in the comments below. If Sarita's journey resonated, please consider subscribing to join our global community, where every overlooked voice finds a place. Your heartfelt support helps us continue sharing these crucial stories of hidden truths and resilience. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being an invaluable part of our journey together. Your story matters.